On June the 18th, a massive demonstration in Petrograd, reflecting general discontent with government policies, demanded the resignation of 10 non-socialist ministers. More and more people carried Bolshevik slogans. Military cadets with their Russian tricolors were attacked, their pro-government banners torn apart. On July the 3rd, the 1st Machine Gun Regiment, instigated by the Bolsheviks, tried to recruit several other units to join in a coup attempt. Armed gangs roamed the streets of the capital. The riot had subsided after dark, but flared again the next day with even greater intensity. Workers and soldiers in Petrograd were joined by army regiments from the city's outlying areas and anarchist sailors from Kronstadt. 500,000 demonstrators marched along Nevsky Prospect. The sailors leading the procession were hit twice by machine gun bursts from the rooftops and returned fire. The identities of the machine gunners who provoked the shooting remain a mystery. It is known that Lenin, recalling the events much later, said, "We made lots of foolish mistakes in July." Kerensky was forced to summon loyal troops from the front to restore order in the capital. Armored units and military school cadets patrolled the streets, disarming the rebels. The government believed that the Bolsheviks had been the driving force behind the coup attempt. Following Kerensky's orders, military cadets took the palace where the party's central committee had been located and wrecked Bolshevik print shops. Once again, the Bolsheviks went underground. The press launched a campaign against Lenin, labeling him a German agent. The government accused him of organizing the revolt and subpoenaed him for trial. Lenin opted to go into hiding. He shaved his beard, put on makeup, and using counterfeit identification, traveled secretly to the countryside and then to Finland. Meanwhile, mass desertions from the front had begun. On July the 7th, General Kornilov sent a telegram to the government demanding the reintroduction of capital punishment for deserters. On July the 19th, Kornilov was reinstated as commander-in-chief and given full authority to eradicate insubordination. 5 days later, Alexander Kerensky became prime minister and formed a new coalition cabinet solely of cadet and Socialist Party members. On October the 26th, General Kornilov issued an ultimatum to Kerensky demanding dictatorial authority. Kerensky refused to comply, and the next day Kornilov's troops moved toward Petrograd. Both the government and the Bolsheviks urged the inhabitants of the capital to resist. More than 60,000 soldiers, sailors, and Red Guards were alerted. No fighting took place. Bolshevik propaganda eroded Kornilov's forces. His soldiers refused to attack Petrograd and were disarmed by the city's defenders. Kornilov and his senior officers were arrested. On September the 14th, the government, desperately trying to legitimize its authority, convened the Democratic Conference that elected a legislative body known as the Pre-Parliament. Russia's deepening economic crisis bred discontent. Support for the government waned, while the active role of the Bolsheviks in suppressing the Kornilov rebellion increased their popularity. In September, Lenin's party won a majority in both the Petrograd and Moscow city soviets. Leon Trotsky, who had returned from the US in May and joined the Bolsheviks, became chairman of the Petrograd Soviet. In his letters from Finland, Lenin urged the party's central committee to raise an armed rebellion at once. Although other party leaders opposed Lenin's radical position, preparations for an uprising began. Kerensky was keenly aware of dangerous Bolshevik influences in the army. On October the 8th, he ordered the supposedly unloyal troops of the Petrograd garrison to the front. The Soviet, directed by Trotsky, overrode the order. 150,000 soldiers remained in the city. Only a small number would take part in the Bolshevik coup, but the neutrality of the remainder would be critical to its success. The Petrograd Soviet formed a military revolutionary committee, formally charged with the defense of the capital. Led by Nikolai Podvoisky, the committee became an effective tool of mobilizing soldiers for the coup. Another source of Lenin's military strength was the Baltic Fleet. In April 1917, Baltic sailors had formed their own kind of Soviet, the Centrobolt, headed by 29-year-old Bolshevik Pavel Dybenko. The Centrobolt dispatched 5,000 armed sailors from Kronstadt and 10 armed ships to support the insurrection. The third element of Lenin's forces was 20,000 Red Guards. Many of these workers were among Russia's poorest. They willingly followed Lenin's call to expropriate private property. Most of those who participated in the Bolshevik coup believed they were fighting for democratic Soviets and the Constituent Assembly. Lenin repeatedly stated that his priorities were the same, and even agreed to be a nominee to the Assembly. But his democratic statements were only a ploy to gain support. His only goal was to put his party in power. In early October, after Lenin secretly returned to Petrograd, the crisis quickly escalated. Kerensky could muster only several hundred loyal troops. They were no match for the insurgents, who gathered a large force at the Smolny Institute, headquarters of the Military Revolutionary Committee. On the morning of October the 24th, armed units were dispatched from Smolny to seize vital spots in the city. The government resorted to the use of military school cadets to defend the Winter Palace. While cadets constructed log barricades in the palace square, Bolshevik forces took the Central Telegraph Office, the Petrograd Telegraph Agency, and the bridges over the Neva River. On the night of October the 25th, Lenin, still in disguise, made his way to Smolny. By the next morning, the Bolsheviks had taken the railway terminals and the telephone station, cutting government lines of communication. Kerensky fled from the Winter Palace, but his ministers remained. The overwhelmed defenders of the palace were threatened by the guns of the cruiser Avrora, anchored nearby, and by the artillery located in the Peter and Paul fortress across the Neva. That evening, Bolshevik forces advanced on the palace. Though they met almost no resistance, the building was machine-gunned and assaulted. The insurgents arrested the government ministers and ransacked the former imperial residence. Petrograd citizens quickly became informed of Lenin's first decrees. The announcement of the Bolsheviks' intentions of peace with Germany was followed by the program of land nationalization and the prohibition of all non-Bolshevik newspapers. On October the 29th, military school cadets in the city rebelled in a desperate attempt to save democracy, but were quickly overrun. Their last stronghold, the Vladimir Cadet School, was shelled and seized. The survivors were tortured and executed. Armed opposition to the Bolsheviks in Petrograd ceased to exist. Units of Red Guards and Kronstadt sailors repelled Kerensky's poorly organized attempt to retake Petrograd. After 5 days of bitter fighting, Moscow fell. Soon, all of Central Russia was under Bolshevik control. Still, many Russians believed that the Constituent Assembly, which was to be convened in January 1918, would restore democracy. Newly elected assembly members were enthusiastically welcomed by the people of Petrograd. The Bolsheviks, in conjunction with the left SRs, decided to eliminate this potential threat to their power. The assembly convened on January the 5th. The next day, without warning, Bolshevik guards entered the auditorium. Their leader, Sailor Anatoly Zheleznyakov, ordered the premises cleared. The assembly was disbanded. Protests were stifled. The conflict between Bolshevik supporters and the rest of the population escalated in the civil war that raged throughout Russia for the next 4 years. For this entire period, the Bolsheviks maintained their hold on Central Russia. Their coalition with the left SRs would soon fracture, and after a short military confrontation in July 1918, the SR party would be banned. The Bolsheviks, left alone in the political arena, quickly turned the Soviets into their puppets. In 1921, the sailors from Kronstadt, who helped the Bolsheviks seize power, rebelled, demanding political freedom and more power to the Soviets. But it was too late. After their victory in the Civil War, the Bolsheviks would forge a totalitarian state. Only after 70 years of communism would Russia attempt to return to democracy.